So there's negotiations on the term sheet, always with attorneys on both sides, both on the side of the entrepreneur or the portfolio company, which is a term used to refer to the company that a VC fund is going to invest in, and on the side of the venture capital fund. Once you get a term sheet, it's a very high level indication that the company is going to invest. And it's rare, but it does happen, and it shouldn't happen, in my opinion, where a company gets a term sheet and they walk away from it, particularly in these days when, even though we saw the numbers, there's a huge amount of investment going into early stage companies. Not every company is getting funded. Most companies are being passed over. So once you get that term sheet, my advice is always to the portfolio companies, depending upon if they've received any other term sheets, is sign that term sheet. We'll negotiate it hard, but unless there's something completely outrageous that the company will be taken away from you, you want the money. You need the money, and very often, if you don't get the money, your company dies. Fire the employees, shut down the operations, and you're finished. So once the term sheet's signed, it's still, the process is still ongoing. It's just really the beginning. And thereafter, once the term sheet is signed, there's typically a provision that doesn't allow the company to negotiate with any other investors during a particular time called a lockup period, usually about 2 to 3 months. And that gives the venture capital fund and their associates a time to really dig deeply into the company. At the beginning, they did some high-level due diligence. The next stage is, more detailed due diligence into the market and preparing studies and things like that, and looking at the industry as a whole and you and your people. And once they've completed their due diligence, typically the deal will go forward. Now, at the same time the due diligence starts, the venture capital fund, their lawyer will present deal documents. Okay, deal documents we'll go through exactly what they are, but there's about 4 to 5 different contracts that you'll get, negotiate, deals with all the terms that were in the term sheet are now amplified through several very complex documents. And that's what we do, on these venture capital deals. It's very lawyer intensive because the documents themselves are complex. It takes a lot of time to go through them, and there is a lot of negotiation on some things, and it's an opportunity for the venture capital fund as well as the portfolio company to get a sense of how the parties will work with each other, because these are long-term relationships. And once a venture fund invests in a company, this is a relationship that's going to be years and years in duration. So all of these early stages, negotiation of the term sheet, the due diligence, the meetings, it's a courting relationship. And the negotiation of the documents is an opportunity for both sides to see if they really want to be married in a way to this group of people for an extended period of time, notwithstanding the money, because it's a long time and both sides really need to rely on each other wholeheartedly. And finally is the closing. Once the negotiations are done, the contracts are finalized and then signed, there's a funding, and that's a happy day for everyone, particularly the company that's getting the money. Anyone have any questions so far on, yes?
What's the range of deals that you work on as far as venture capital? What would be the minimum type of funding that you might seek for?
Okay, the question was, what is the range of deals that we work on in terms of the amounts in the venture capital world or the venture capital area? And it varies. Typically, $500,000 is probably the lowest, and they can go up to the tens of millions. Okay, it varies, and there's different ways to structure those deals. Sometimes part of it is through promissory notes, sometimes it's pure equity, but those are typically the amounts. You're typically going to be looking at $500,000 starting point for most. Okay, angels are different. The threshold may be lower at $250,000, and then like the friends and family rounds, you're going to see even lower.
For me, when you talk about friends and family, that mom and dad might, or brother or sister might invest some money in the company. When you talk about an angel as opposed to an investor, what's the difference between an angel and a...
Well, there are angel groups. There's organized groups of angels, and then there are people who are referred to as angels. They're individuals who have investment capital that look around, and they don't go in with a fund, they don't go in with a group, they go in on their own, and they're referred to as angels.
Oh, okay.
Yes?
Is there any way to shorten the lockup period?
Everything is negotiated. So, typically it's not going to be less than a month. 2 months is kind of pushing it, but it's, again, if the documents are negotiated and finished, then the lockup period is irrelevant. That's typically what it's going to be. Sure. So some of the things that, this is the process. Some issues always to consider even now is what type of entity you want to use. Is it going to be a corporation or a limited liability company? Where? Is it going to be Delaware, New York? These issues, vary based on the company, the operations, where the people are located, et cetera. Where the primary office is going to be located, whether in your search for money, if venture capital may not be available, if there's something else, some kind of bridge funding through a loan. There are always questions that come up about who's the person who's signing, who's the chief, what are the individuals' titles that are working for the company. You'd be surprised how many times we get a company, we say, okay, who's the CEO? Well, we're trying to be democratic about this, we don't really have a CEO, and these different kinds of titles. Very important when you go to these funds that you have traditional titles if you want them to take you seriously. Okay, and typically you do want to have, one person who is the chief, though, there's ways to balance, power sharing, depending upon who and, what the kind of structure of the relationship is between the founders. Considerations of how much money you need and what it's going to be used for. Okay, and this is just some of the issues that we talked about. The term sheet, it sets forth the key business terms. It does provide this window that we're talking about, and you want to give the venture fund the opportunity to assess the leadership of the company and how sophisticated you are and whether you're the right match for them. If anyone is interested in looking at what a term sheet looks like, the National Venture Capital Association has one online. Very often that may be a similar kind of template that you get from the venture fund. There may be additional provisions, maybe provisions that are not in there, but that's a great place to look at one because it gives you everything you need. We talked a little bit before about what the standard kind of venture documents are once you sign that term sheet. Okay, they're laid out here. I'll go through them. There's a purchase agreement, and basically when an investor invests in your company, they're buying equity. So the key document, at least part of the key documents, is the purchase agreement to buy the equity, whether it's going to be common shares or preferred shares, or it's going to be units. If it's a limited liability company, we don't use the terminology of shares or stock. We typically use the terminology of units or membership interests, okay? LLC versus corporation. There's an amended and restated certificate of incorporation, which is part of the formation documents for corporations. That is amended, and that contains various veto rights and protections for the investors. Or in the LLC scenario, it's an operating agreement, okay, which contains similar protections, but it's again, limited liability companies versus corporations, slightly different. There's an investors' rights agreement that provides certain rights, such as what kind of information the investors are going to be getting on a regular basis, how often they get financial statements, are they going to get pro formas, is it going to be quarterly, what happens if the company goes public, what happens if they want to register stock, if they want to force the company to register. All these things are set forth in an investors' rights agreement. Another document called a right of first refusal and co-sale agreement, and sometimes there are provisions that are put in the purchase agreement or in other agreements, but in essence, they say, founders, we're investing, you cannot sell your shares until we tell you that you can. Okay, so typically the venture funds want the founders in there for at least 5 years, and they don't want the founders to sell any stock. They want skin in the game. Okay, so this is going to prevent you from selling your own stock, even if you have to raise money, unless they consent to that. Okay, then, of course, when investing in a early stage company, the most important element of the company, in addition to the ideas, are the people, the executives, you're the entrepreneurs. Okay, so they're going to want you to be signed on with an employment agreement. Okay, very important. There's going to be non-compete provision, lots of things that make people a little uncomfortable, but it's a trade-off that here you're getting a sophisticated group of people to give you money, to give you experience, to introduce you to customers, partners, et cetera, and there is a trade-off. And most of the time, as you see, because there are many investments, all these recent deals that we're hearing about, these provisions are in there, very common.